The Second World War was an era when aviation determined the outcome of battles, and bombers embodied the symbol of power and technological progress. Among the hundreds of combat aircraft that took to the skies during those years, only a few models earned true respect and the affection of pilots. The consolidated B-24 Liberator belonged to this rare category, an aircraft that not only carried out combat missions, but also transformed the very idea of long-range strike aviation. Today, we will take a closer look at how the B-24 was created, which technical solutions made it unique, and how it performed at different stages of the war. From the innovative Davis wing to the challenges of the bomb bay, we will examine all the aspects that made this aircraft special. We will also touch on its role in key operations, such as the bombing of the oil refineries at Ploiești, or the protection of sea lanes against German submarines. By the mid-1930s, the U.S. Army already had the B-17 bomber in service, which was considered a true breakthrough in aviation. This aircraft, known as the Flying Fortress, demonstrated impressive qualities, reliability, durability, and the ability to carry a significant bomb load. But the military always looked to the future, and already by 1935, it became clear that, despite all its advantages, the B-17 had limitations for the strategic aviation of the future. War in Europe was drawing near, and the United States needed an aircraft that could surpass its predecessor in range, speed, and altitude. It was at this moment that discussions began about creating a new bomber that would meet the ambitious demands of the time. The military outlined a clear set of technical requirements for the future machine. The new aircraft had to cover at least 6,400 kilometers in range to strike distant targets without the need for frequent refueling. Its maximum speed had to reach 480 kilometers per hour, allowing it to evade or complicate attacks from enemy fighters. Its service ceiling had to be at least 10,500 meters, so that the bomber could operate at altitudes unreachable for most anti-aircraft guns. A bomb load of up to 3.5 tons corresponded to the need to destroy large industrial or military targets. Among the companies that responded to this challenge was Consolidated Aircraft Corporation. Until then, it had worked mostly on training planes, but it held a serious trump card: experience in developing the Model 31 flying boat with advanced engineering solutions. This project became the foundation for the future B-24, as the company's engineers saw in it the potential for adaptation to military needs. Consolidated received a contract for the development of a prototype designated XB-24 on March 30, 1939. According to the agreement, the company had to present a finished aircraft within 9 months, an incredibly tight deadline, considering the complexity of the task. But the team of engineers set to work with full dedication. For Consolidated, the contract with the military meant the chance to secure its position in the combat aviation market. The company understood that the success of this project could change its status and open the doors to large-scale orders. The military, in turn, placed great hopes on the new bomber, as the war in Europe had already begun, and the United States was preparing for possible involvement. At the San Diego plant, work went on day and night, since the company's reputation and the future of American strategic aviation depended on the success of this project. Isaac Ladden, the chief designer, knew how to combine engineering precision with a practical approach. His team used the groundwork gained during the development of the Model 31 flying boat, but adapting it to the requirements of a military bomber turned out to be a difficult task. 8 months and 28 days after the signing of the contract, on December 29, 1939, the completed XB-24 prototype rolled out of the San Diego factory. This moment became a triumph for Ladden's team. They had met the incredibly compressed schedule. That same day, Consolidated's chief test pilot, William Wheatley, took the aircraft into the sky for its maiden test flight. The flight was successful, but ahead lay a large-scale testing program that had to prove the XB-24's ability to perform the assigned tasks. Every flight was carefully analyzed, since even the smallest shortcomings could influence the decision to adopt the aircraft into service. To speed up the process, Consolidated took an unusual step. The military were involved in testing already during the factory trials. Normally, Army pilots would only join after the company had completed its internal checks, but in this case there was no time for standard procedures. Military pilots took an active part in the flights, evaluating the aircraft's behavior in different conditions, its maneuverability, and stability. This approach made it possible to shorten the schedule and obtain valuable feedback from those who would later fly the B-24 in real combat. For Consolidated, it was the first experience of creating such an ambitious combat aircraft, and for the military, a chance to assess the machine that was to become the backbone of their strategic aviation. In this section, we will examine the key technical features of the aircraft, in particular the revolutionary Davis wing, as well as the solutions that allowed the machine to adapt to the strict demands of combat aviation. The B-24 was designed as an all-metal high-wing aircraft with twin tail fins. Its fuselage, despite lacking elegance, was practical in conception. The shape of the body allowed bombs weighing up to 900 kilograms to be carried in the bomb bay, arranged vertically, which maximized combat effectiveness. For ground maneuverability, the aircraft was fitted with a nose landing gear, which also allowed for emergency landings on unprepared fields without the traditional belly landing. Four nacelles housed Wright Cyclone R-1830 air-cooled engines, which were later equipped with turbochargers for high-altitude performance. The true hallmark of the B-24 was its wing, developed by engineer David Davis. This unconventional solution transformed the understanding of bomber aerodynamics. The wing featured a narrow, elongated, teardrop-shaped profile, which significantly reduced drag and increased lift. Wind tunnel tests showed that such a wing provided better speed and range compared to traditional designs. These characteristics proved critically important since the military demanded an aircraft capable of flying 6,400 kilometers. Thanks to the Davis wing, the B-24 could fly faster and farther than many of its counterparts, making it an ideal candidate for the role of a high-altitude bomber. However, the unique wing also had its drawbacks. Its optimal characteristics only appeared at altitudes above 5,000 meters, corresponding to the intended role of the aircraft in strategic bombing. The narrow construction left little room for fuel tanks, creating a problem in meeting the required range. To solve this, the engineers took a bold step. They coated the entire internal cavity of the wing with sealant, turning it into a single fuel tank. This solution enabled the aircraft to complete its maximum range test flight, but it soon became clear that it was unacceptable for combat use. In real wartime conditions, damage to the wing could result in fuel leakage or even disaster. Realizing this, the designers began experimenting with installing traditional fuel tanks in the wing panels. Eventually, they developed separate, self-sealing tanks with protective lining, a special coating that reduced the risk of fire when hit by enemy rounds. This solution became a compromise between safety and range, allowing the B-24 to meet military specifications without sacrificing combat effectiveness. After the successful B-24 trials, the time came for the next important stage, the bomber's adoption into service and the beginning of mass production. In 1941, the B-24 Liberator officially entered the arsenal of the U.S. Army, marking a significant step for Consolidated Aircraft Corporation. This moment represented the transition from an experimental prototype to a combat-ready machine capable of carrying out real missions. However, the path proved difficult, as the first steps of the aircraft's use were tied to export and adaptation to the needs of the Allies, particularly Great Britain. The first production models, designated LB-30, were intended for export, while the U.S. Army Air Forces had to wait. Britain, which had already been resisting Germany for a year and a half, urgently needed modern aircraft. The British took over the entire B-24 contract previously ordered by France. Since France was already under occupation, these first 6 bombers, delivered to the Royal Air Force, differed little from the pre-series prototype in their technical characteristics. The key issue lay in their fuel tanks, which lacked protective lining, making the aircraft vulnerable to enemy fire. The British considered them unsuitable for combat missions and converted them into transports. In this new role, the LB-30s performed decently. The bomb bay was sealed, transformed into a cabin for 20 passengers. In the rear fuselage on the left side, a large cargo door was installed, and provisions were made for loading through a movable nose section of the cockpit. The armament was removed to lighten the structure and increase payload capacity. These modifications allowed the LB-30s to be used for transporting cargo and personnel over long distances, which proved critically important for sustaining Allied logistics during the war. However, tragedy soon followed. In August 1941, two similar accidents involving LB-30 transports occurred, claiming 44 lives. These events marked the first B-24 losses of the Second World War and underscored the need for further design improvements. In parallel with exports to Britain, Consolidated prepared the B-24 for mass production for the U.S. Army Air Forces. After a pre-series batch of 7 aircraft, a major order was placed, marking the official recognition of the bomber as combat-ready. This stage became a true triumph for the company, as the B-24 proved its ability to meet the military's high demands. The British employed the B-24 in the defense of convoys in the Atlantic Ocean against German wolf packs, groups of submarines that hunted merchant ships. The 4 Wright Cyclone R-1830 engines provided high reliability, critically important for long patrol flights over the sea. The bomber's long range allowed the B-24 to operate far from bases, covering convoys in areas where other aircraft were ineffective. To fulfill these missions, the aircraft was equipped with special armament, depth charges for destroying submarines, and later, unguided rockets, and pods carrying 4 20mm cannons. The B-24 was also fitted with radar antennas for submarine detection. At first, these were mounted on the wings and tail section, but later replaced by the distinctive chin radar under the cockpit, which improved both aerodynamics and detection efficiency. A serious drawback of the B-24 lay in the design of its bomb bay doors. They were engineered to retract inside the fuselage during bombing runs, reducing buffeting and improving accuracy. However, in the event of a forced water landing, these doors easily deformed, letting water flood the aircraft and causing it to sink rapidly. For crews who encountered emergencies over the sea, this often ended in tragedy. The problem was especially acute since anti-submarine operations involved long flights over water, where ditching was a very real and deadly risk. Designers attempted to find a solution, but in the early stages of the war, rapid correction of this flaw was complicated by mass production and the urgent demands of the front. The true triumph of the B-24 came in strategic land operations. It was here that this bomber became a key instrument in the hands of the Allies. Thanks to its long range, it could strike targets that the enemy considered unreachable, opening fundamentally new opportunities for U.S. and British air power. The B-24 participated in parallel attacks on Japanese Army depots on Wake Island and Hainan, German submarine bases in Bordeaux, and oil refineries around Ploiești in Romania. These operations demonstrated the bomber's impressive potential. Its range allowed it to fly thousands of kilometers and strike where the enemy least expected it. The attacks on Wake and Hainan were complete successes, proving the effectiveness of the B-24 in Pacific operations. In Europe, however, the situation was much more difficult. German anti-aircraft guns and fighters put up fierce resistance, inflicting heavy losses on bomber groups. In 1942, the Allies still lacked effective escort fighters capable of accompanying the B-24 over its full range, leaving it extremely vulnerable to enemy interceptors. To compensate, the Americans experimented with the idea of adding specially modified aircraft to bomber groups, planes without bomb loads, but equipped with extra armor and weapons. One B-24 was converted for this role, but the idea proved unsuccessful. The bombers returned faster than their armed escorts, which lagged behind on the way back, significantly reducing their usefulness. Pilots identified a serious weakness in the defensive armament of early B-24s. From August 1941, the British began receiving the Liberator II, in which the number of guns was increased to 14, though the caliber remained unchanged. The U.S. Army Air Forces, on the other hand, insisted on equipping their B-24s with heavy machine guns. The standard armament layout included a twin consolidated A6 tail turret, one gun on each side, and a twin Martin, Maryland A3 turret to protect the upper hemisphere. The lower hemisphere was covered by a retractable Bendix or Sperry turret. The defense of the forward hemisphere was a particularly acute problem. German fighters often attacked the B-24 head-on. Early models had only a single heavy machine gun in the nose, which proved inadequate. Crews tried to solve the issue on their own, installing extra forward-firing guns at angles. However, operating them manually in strong airstreams was difficult and largely ineffective. By late 1943, one technician suggested installing a tail-mounted electric A6 turret in the nose. The solution proved so successful that soon all aircraft in the group were similarly upgraded. The nose turret significantly strengthened forward defense and improved the aircraft's balance, which had originally suffered from a heavy tail. These improvements enabled the B-24 to carry out strategic bombing more effectively, particularly against German industry. In 1943, the main targets were heavy industrial plants. From 1944, the focus shifted to aircraft production infrastructure and the Third Reich's fuel facilities. The raids on refineries, especially at Ploiești, greatly weakened Germany's ability to sustain the air war. From a technical standpoint, the B-24 demonstrated an ideal combination of innovation and practicality. Its design, built around the Davis wing and powerful Wright Cyclone engines, achieved results unattainable by many other aircraft of its time. At the same time, the simplicity of its mass production made it possible to build thousands of machines within short deadlines. Through these efforts, the B-24 became an instrument that brought victory closer, a symbol of American industrial might and engineering genius, capable of overcoming any obstacle in the name of freedom. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and see you in the next videos.